Hello and welcome to the Character Drawing course, Lesson 1. My name is Taylor Payton and I will be guiding you through this lesson and every other lesson in the course. You can check out thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, which is probably where you got this course, for other rad courses and material to help you in your artistic ascent. So basically in Lesson 1, we're going to be talking a lot about gestures and construction, mostly gestures, leading into Lesson 2, where we will talk even more about construction. So basically, gesture drawings, if I can pull up one of my slides here, are these very loose sketches you're seeing that I've lowered the opacity on. I'll bring those up again real quick. These are super loose sketches, which kind of permit you to get a feeling in terms of the flow, the layout of the pose and the limbs, some of the weight, all that good stuff. There's a little bit of construction here. It's sort of a hybridized process that I've developed over the years, drawing a lot of characters. I'm going to show you all the different aspects and all the things that I think about when I'm drawing my characters and how you can apply them to your own characters as well as your drawing process in general. So basically, I'm going to take you through drawing some of these gestures and talking about some construction. So first and foremost, construction, or rather gestures, we want to do them fairly quick, usually between 1 to 5 minutes if we're doing a gesture drawing exercise. Of course, you can always go longer or shorter depending on how you like to practice your artwork. We're going to think about the flow based on how the spine and limbs are kind of aligned, and then we're going to think about the weight of the pose, which again, we will cover all of this throughout this lesson. We're also going to introduce some more construction stuff. Construction is much slower usually. We're going to have more solidity to it rather than flow, so kind of our balance there. And lastly, we're going to talk about the alignment of the limbs and how they all kind of fit and lock together just in a more constructive and exacting way. So a gesture, really quick, I will just draw one for you here. Let's use red because it's easy to see. So basically I can start with a line of action, which creates a spine. Then I can extrude from that spine a head and a torso and some limbs. So we'll just do that pretty randomly here, just so that I can get the point of the gesture across, because we're going to do it very quickly and live so you can see how it works. Started with a pretty funky torso, but we'll just get a little more geometric there, a little more constructive. Usually you just want to make very succinct marks. We'll have the figure pushing into construction. So these are the lines for the limbs, and then we'll start to kind of lay out the general direction and general forms of those limbs. We'll go over it later with better construction. We'll also use a crosshair there to create the form of the head so we know which way that the character is facing, just a little eye indication there. And all this is very just indicative. It's just showing you where stuff is going to go. It's not about worrying too deeply about getting everything perfect and proper and proportionate. It's really more about just getting the general vague idea across. Sometimes you can make your gestures very, very small, aka thumbnails, which are a great way to do a ton of them very quickly. And then you can just go over them later with, the other information, the other fundamentals that you've practiced, which you will learn in this course. So that's a really super quick gesture I made from a line of action, as you saw while I was just sort of showcasing the process there. It was very quick. We got some good flow from this leg all the way into these arms, this leg supporting the weight as well. And that just helps us to set ourselves up for a more constructive phase, which we will go into in the very next part of this lesson. So I will see you in that video. Hello and welcome back to Lesson 1. This is the second module. In this one, we're going to be doing some more gesture drawing demos, just to talk about these two different sort of approaches to gesture drawing, just to give you two different ways that you can kind of express this first part of the character drawing process. The simple methods for application, basically you have the gesture, which is A, and then construction being the B phase of something, aka 1 and 2. You also have gesture plus construction, so sort of a hybridized version of that, so it's just AB. And I'll show you both of them, of course, throughout this particular lesson. But if you're curious right now, for those of you who are very eager and want to jump ahead to drawing, the most amazing characters that you possibly can, what do you do after this phase? It's the cleanup and the polish phase, which we will get to in a later lesson. So worry not, just stick with me here, and we're going to learn a strong basis so that you don't polish something that you're not proud of. So basically, what I just showed you in the first one was the first gesture here, which let me just grab him, move him into this folder, close out all the other info. You then have this gesture pushing forward in all of the kind of active ways that we would be looking for in a particular gesture. Maybe they're, trying to stop an enemy, or there's any number of things that it could be at this point. So let's just appoint something at that kind of juncture. So what I'm going to do is maybe have them casting a spell. Let's just have them cast a spell, because that's simple and easy. We get a nice straight line for like a staff or a magic staff or something. I know quite a bit of you are probably fantasy artists or have an interest in fantasy, so we'll just call this a staff, and then we'll say that they're shooting off some energy or something. Again, very gestural, very simple, very sketchy. This is the A phase of something. Next, we're going into the B phase, so I'll lower the opacity here and use a new layer, switch up the color, and we're going to get more into construction now, just a little bit of construction, because I do want to save and really go deeper in on it in not only lesson 2, but also in this lesson as well, because construction is important. So basically this is kind of abridged construction, doing all of these really quick aspects of gesture drawing. It's kind of a chicken or egg scenario, whether you want to do construction first as far as practice or gesture drawing first as far as practice. But I always suggest that any artist goes through the process of both, simply because gesture drawing will give you the speed, and there's things you can only get with that sort of quick alacrity that you develop. And construction is sort of the slower, more methodical approach that the artists that don't tend to be quite as fast usually excel at. But just as a simple breakdown, the construction is really more about getting clearer on what basic shapes you're using to create your character, so you understand sort of a mannequinized version of them. Thinking about where all the different muscles and muscle groups go, just so you have a clearer picture of what the body actually looks like and the shapes that make it up as you're working on drawing your figure here. So figure drawing and character work obviously go hand in hand. Typically, it takes quite a bit of practice on both sides before you can hybridize your process into this sort of A-B modality. But it really doesn't matter what way you go about it, as long as you get the results you're looking for. But again, it's wise to practice both of them. So here I'm breaking it down much more methodically. I'm going to lower the opacity on this so that you can see it even better as far as the second version of the drawing. So here I can subdivide any portion of this character based on where I know the anatomical parts generally sit, like the scapula right there, the trapezius muscles right here, some of those longer, more elastic neck muscles, and then getting down into the lumbar region right there, into the pelvis. And it's usually just taking these fairly complicated shapes and turning them into more understandable shapes and subdividing at points that make sense, such as right there where the femur kind of starts to shoot out from the hip. Then you have the knee, which you can guess helps us create all those wonderful angles and connects our upper leg to our lower leg. And lastly, we're just going to do that process one more time, except this is the rear, or the leg that's going backward in space according to our picture plane and the kind of pose we've set up. So I like to just make a couple lines to indicate the shading there and construct very similar shapes, like the gastrocnemius part of the calf, the soleus, the longer banded part that goes down into the ankle there, into the Achilles tendon right there. And if you're concerned about anatomy, if that's something you really feel you need more work with, I do have a simple anatomy for artists course, And you can check that out at thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com. But of course, it's not necessary for this course, although it is immensely helpful. So something to definitely think about. If you've already taken it, then I am immensely pleased that you have made your way through it. And if not, just return to it when you have time, Either way, it'll help you to kind of understand how you can simplify and break down anatomy like I'm doing here, which we won't cover as in depth as I do in that course, but we will go over some of it in this one. So as you can see, I'm just picking the points where the limbs are going to bend, or rather the joints, I'm picking the joints out so that those will allow for a bend in any of these shapes that I'm using here. It's basically constructing a simplified human, the same way you'd break down any other kind of figure. And then lastly, the head was pretty good. We don't really need to mess with that too much. It's basically just an augmented egg shape, So we'll just go ahead and kind of fix that up. And now we have a nice little mannequin that we can use, which has a lot more construction to it, a lot more certainty, just due to the subdivisions and the simplifications of the various shapes herein. It's a lot clearer where things begin and end. There's a lot less uncertainty in the lines. The lines don't have to be pretty and perfect at this point. It's just about using these simplified shapes to construct what you're trying to construct. So maybe I'll even change where one of these limbs is going, just so that I can create a little bit more of an interesting silhouette, which we will also talk about in this course. So we're going to try and line these limbs up here. Use a nice kind of wedge shape for the hands, simplified sort of action figure hands. Like I said, you can think of these as action figures or mannequins, and that will serve you on your quest to simplify and understand a lot of these items and elements, because it takes practice, and there's no really right or wrong way to do it. It's just if you're getting the result that you're looking for in terms of either accuracy or flow or dynamism or how your process feels. So here is version number 2 of our drawing here. And that has a lot more constructive elements to it. You can think about the obliques if you want, or start to think about how the latimus dorsi are going to connect and push forward. So you can break down the anatomy as much as you like until you feel comfortable going over the constructed figure a third time, which is the cleanup or polish phase, which we will save again for a later lesson. However, let's go into this A-B construction method now, and I'll break that one down for you so you can see what the hybrid process looks like. Just again, so you have 2 modalities to kind of attack this phase of the character creation process with. So I'll get to that in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back to yet another lesson in the character drawing course. In this one, we're going to be doing some more gesture drawing. Some of the time I don't have the opportunity to both record audio and draw simultaneously just because there's too much noise around me. So in this one, I just pre-recorded some of the hybrid gesture construction drawing, and we're going to just talk you through that process. So basically, you really want to start with a line of action, which is the spine. Spines are usually S-curved or more of a C-curve, depending on the posture. And once you have that spine in place, you can sort of extrapolate and lathe a head, a neck, and a trunk, or the core, right on top of the spine, and then you'll be able to extrude out from that with limbs and hands and feet. So that's what you see me doing here, just really quickly. This will be a fairly short lesson. This is real time too. It only takes me about 90 seconds to get down a really basic hybrid gesture using some simple kind of made up geometry, as well as just lines to showcase where the flow of the limbs or where the flow of the spine is going to generally reside on the picture plane. So in this case, we're just going over the arms now, getting to the very end where there's hands, and then going back and figuring out which leg is in front of the other. And we just do a little light shading just to showcase that. These are basically just rough notes for later so that you can go over your stuff again with much more certainty. It's a really nice part of the process because eventually you're going to get to the point where if you're really comfortable with the subject matter, the pose, etc., and you're deep in your comfort zone after a lot of drawing and just painting mileage and artwork in general, you'll be able to kind of combine these steps all into one and get a really good result still. But I'm a firm believer in knowing each and every one of the steps and practicing those steps in isolation, so that when you begin to hybridize or skip around or modulate the process, then you'll have a much greater idea of how to do that and a much more intuitive sense of how to do it. But going back to the gestures, the drawing order is of course modular. You don't have to start with a line of action, although I recommend it. That's the way I learned to draw when I was going to school for animation. And specifically, I focused a little more on 2D animation than I did on 3D. It basically lets the line of action do most of the storytelling for you in the beginning. But in this case, we have just sort of a basic ground plane in this demonstration, which helps to give the character something to stand on, so you're not just working with infinite white space. And that will kind of let you, work downwards from the head into the core, neck, etc. And we just go ahead and draw the limbs in based on where the lines landed. And you can see, again, it's a little more methodical. It's a little slower than the gesture drawing, which is typically much looser, much quicker, but we're still just trying to get the feeling of the pose down. So in this case, the hips are pushed a little forward, the head is slouched a little, the traps are a little big, so it might be a bit of a thug, or a thuggish pose, or somebody who resides with more of their weight in their center of their pelvis. And that will just allow you to really get a feel, or to intuitively develop your figures moving forward, because then you can kind of get character pretty easily just with a gesture, just with the hybrid construction method. So we'll go deeper into construction in the next lesson. So let's flip over to that one now that you've seen some gesture drawing action. All right, welcome back. We're going to get more into construction and make sure that we get a little more methodical as we proceed with our drawing and our character drawings. So basically, I'm just creating that ground plane again right here, and that allows me to, again, have no real uncertainty when it comes to where my figure's going to sit or stand. It's just a helpful thing to do. Eventually, you'll begin to get so comfortable drawing your characters that you'll have the ground plane imaged in your mind when you look at a blank sheet of paper or a new document in whatever digital drawing and painting medium you like to use. In this case, when we're doing the construction, I'm just slowing down. It really allows me to think more about the shapes of the character in their most basic essence, and to get the building blocks of the body down, because it just helps to have more of a sense of how the proportions are going to kind of come together, which we will talk more about in lesson 2, where we get even deeper into construction, because you want a really solid basis and a lot of solid theory and practice behind how you're going to be building your figures. And that will allow you to, again, just increase your skill level gradually until this stuff becomes more second nature and you can focus on being more creative. But this is the stuff that helps you express that creativity and solve the problems you're going to run into. So just start to develop your own shapes, start to develop your own mannequins, based on studying whatever you can when it comes to gesture drawing and construction. I use a lot of forms that are inspired by certain books that I've gone through and copied the drawings from until they were more second nature to me. Some of those books are by like George Bridgman or Harold Speed. And I'll include links to those books in the PDF document that has all the assignments as well for this particular course. And so you can check those out if those are something you're interested in augmenting your learning further with. But even so, you can just sort of glean off of what I've already done to get a sort of a start, or you could use whatever method of construction that works for you, whatever shapes feel good for you. Because when you're getting more methodical and getting more measured and subdividing those shapes, it really allows you to think about, again, the geometric placement of all the different limbs and joints and where they're going to be sitting in the picture plane. And so as I put in the lower right corner there, The mathematical element just means, more precise, because mathematicians typically love more exactitude. It just means that you have the ability to visually measure things a little bit better. That's why I subdivided the ground plane beneath the figure, so I knew where the center of that ground plane was in relationship to my figure. And I also just think about all the basic shapes that make up things like hands and feet, and what other shapes I can compare those to. Like, for example, this is pretty much a spatula shape right here, and a spatula, or any tool for that matter, is basically an extension of the person using it. So you can think about different simple geometric forms like cylinders, just cubes or spheres, and how you can kind of cut those up or use parts of those to create and construct your figures. That's what really, will help you to understand this a lot better, to simplify things down more, so that when you're drawing your figure, people will see the finished process. I'll take you through that process in several different ways throughout the duration of this course, but you'll know that underneath the stuff you're not showing is the stuff that gives it that believability, that solidity, that gives you confidence during your process. So as you can see here, I've also included some really basic rocks for my character to sit on, because otherwise he was pretty much floating off the ground plane. But since I knew where that plane was, I was able to place some geometry to, kind of give him a place to just reside. Now we're going into some very light storytelling here, guys, just to show more construction, because I wanted this construction demo to be pretty informative. So this is going to be a differently proportioned fairy type creature with a larger head in comparison to the rest of the body, and she's going to be facing the more male character, who's sort of looking a little confused, maybe just getting up from having taken a nap near those rocks or something. And we're just using those same methods to construct the shapes that make up this fairy character. And she's going to be ultimately presenting him with a little piece of geometry, again, which is a bottle, just a cylinder that has been kind of modified and shaped. What really helped me get better at drawing, and I know this is going to sound weird, is 3D modeling. I was mandated for my degree as a bachelor's of computer science and media arts and animation to do a lot of 3D modeling in school, and so I spent years and years in programs like Maya and 3ds Max learning how geometry works and how topology flows. Even if just intuitively, if I didn't understand the complex trigonometry behind the code, I could still glean how different shapes reacted when you deform them, or what makes good topology. And that really allowed me to bring all that back into drawing, which is why I am a huge advocate of sort of Renaissance style learning, wherein you take from a bunch of different disciplines and use those kinds of fundamentals in every domain that you study, and bring them back into your creative domains, or you synergize in those creative domains by combining them. For example, drawing stuff out and then 3D modeling it, or doing a quick 3D model and then drawing over it. And people in the industry do this stuff all the time. It's really helpful. I don't think any of it's cheating, to be honest, and to be really frank with you, no professional really cares. As long as you're not stealing someone else's work and claiming it as your own, then whatever methods work for you are methods that work for you. And you should lean in as hard as you can to whatever modality you have for learning, whether you're very musically inclined, mathematically inclined, because it's going to help you in your drawing. And the fundamentals and the generalized principles that hold true in those domains will transfer in some way into drawing, if they're true or closer in degree to truth as far as fundamentals and generalized principles go. So this is the third figure in this scene that I'm adding, who seems to be getting up sort of in a groggy fashion as well. And we're just starting with the hips in this case. I didn't start with the line of action. You can pretty much start anywhere you want when you're constructing these figures, because now I'm almost treating it like a 3D model. So I'm, taking parts, scaling them up, or moving them around, translating them in space. And this is just how my brain works now. I know that people do this even if they have no experience with 3D modeling of any, of any capacity, but it really helped me to get to it in terms of this process, in terms of construction. If you're a sculptor, you could, think about it in that way. Whatever way helps you with these building blocks and helps you to place these forms in space, in regards to your perspective and your vanishing points in the picture plane, it's just going to be useful. So another thing you're seeing me do a lot is subdivide those forms, create different little cuts or lines within the larger shapes to help infer more form, more dimension. And we'll elaborate upon all these things that I'm talking about a little bit later in the course and in this lesson. So if anything doesn't seem clear to you right now, I really wouldn't worry about it. Just focus on, being very conscientious when you're creating and constructing your figures, and you'll realize if something's working pretty quickly or if something isn't. Obviously, gesture drawing is the fastest, and you can erase and try a bunch of different stuff very quickly to see if it works. But the advantage to the construction method, you are able to get more accuracy, which is preferred in some instances when you have a clear idea of what your demonstration is going to be. So I took and had her kind of waking up as well. Whatever happened prior to this moment that we're seeing right here has both figures looking kind of confused. Obviously the fairy knows what's going on and is presenting one of the figures with an item, and we're just going ahead and constructing all these different forms to tell that story. And now we have a little story using just basic shapes, basic geometry, and we're able to go over these later, and I'll show you that, not this particular image, just later using constructed figures. Hello and welcome back. In this particular lesson, we are honing in on the assignment very quickly here. And what I'm just going to show you is a recording I did just a little bit ago of sort of the hybridized constructive gesture method that I use to do my own work. So it's the most natural process for me at this point. And it just showcases 3 different gestures, 3 different figures, and sort of aligns them in different ways for a more full composition. And once you're able to gesture quickly like this, of course, this is time-lapsed for the sake of your time so that you get more practice time and less time watching. It's really helpful just to get to the point wherein you can throw out limbs, wherever they need to be, wherever you need to test them, but also have a decent amount of construction. It really helps to have some anatomical knowledge, lots of gesture drawing mileage, a fair amount of construction drawing mileage, and just using these different modalities of drawing to really get different vectors of your drawing power developed. And that's one of the big things that I earnestly believe in, and one of the big things that I teach is that the deeper you can go on a couple different areas and modalities of drawing, the stronger your overall drawing will be. Later we'll talk about, I believe it's Liebig's law of the minimum, which I think is applied more to ecology, but in terms of any other kind of transposable idea or principle, it talks about how the weakest or the least potent resource, the scarcest resource, will ultimately determine how strong the overall effect is. So if you're really not good at construction, but you're amazing at gestures, your stuff is going to look a little more loose, potentially a little less accurate. And that could hold the work back in that regard. Of course, you could still be 100% professional and still not have the best construction. Likewise, your construction can be really strong, your gestures a little weak. And so maybe you have amazing solidity and really good proportions, but there's just a little bit of a static feeling. It's just a little, stuck in sort of a stiff pose, or you have poses you're very comfortable constructing and other ones not so much. So in this particular piece, I'm going for, again, the hybrid method. I like to have a fair amount of dynamism with enough accuracy to make it believable. And that's just kind of how I have parsed it thus far in my own learning journey. And you are welcome to take it however you feel intuitively called to do so, until something starts to hold you back and you can kind of feel that enervation, in which case I would recommend to either work on construction or gestures separately in order to start solving that problem of things being too stiff and static, or things being, dynamic but loose and a little sloppy. So Here's the second figure coming in here, just having these sort of jumping or floating figures because I didn't start with the ground plane in this drawing, as you can see, and it really lends itself better to aerial action because, of course, there's stuff going on that isn't currently attached to the earth. So here's the third and final figure in the background here that I'm gesturing in. And these are all from imagination. I didn't have any reference up when I was doing this. However, in the assignment, I will require that most of your gesture drawing is reference-based, and then you use some from imagination as well to kind of round out being able to apply what you're learning without relying, on another image, which is fine. There are artists that rely really, really, really assiduously on reference and make absolutely gorgeous art, and there are artists that never use reference but still make equally beautiful art. It's just knowing the different tools, the different options, and I want you to have both. I want you to have a well-rounded artistic education experience because that will ultimately lead to being able to traverse your creative domain in the freest possible way. So much like working with reference or working without reference, these are, to me, both different vectors that you can continue to practice and work with and get really good at each one separately and then figure out which one works for you or what hybrid of process. It's not completely binary. Sometimes you use reference for one part and then you can just entirely construct the other parts from imagination, So we'll really start to dive more into these ideas and these generalized principles as we proceed through the course. But for now, I'm just trying to get an idea or a semblance of these figures, even though I liked the other pose of the blue figure. I felt it was a little too weak, a little too stumbly, where the other ones seem a little more assured. And so that's where I'm going in and giving him just a much better pose in terms of actually standing on a ground plane that I configured using the back figure. I didn't need to draw it. I just needed to draw the figure. And so now I have 3 gestures that I can go over, and we'll talk even deeper about the process of going over your gestures or going over your construction with, drawings that look like actual things and not just really rough, loose animation mannequins or, sketch mannequins or thumbnail drawings. But again, I just want you to be patient and practice this step because it gives you a lot of freedom down the line. So thanks for watching in this particular lesson, and I'm going to just have a really quick time lapse in the next video showcasing, what we're going to learn in later lessons so you don't get too bored with this exercise and so you know why it's important. After which we'll dive into the assignment, and then I will send you on your way to create some potent artwork that you can feel confident moving into the later lessons after having learned the principles therein. Hello and welcome back. Here is the final demo before we get into the assignment portion. In this particular demo, I'm going to be taking the blue figure up front and just going over that particular figure with more detail, more of a rough sketch as opposed to a rough kind of hybridized gesture. And then I will hand you your particular assignment for this lesson. So basically how I like to start is just lowering the opacity of everything so that my eye is less confused. Obviously, if you're working very sketchy, things can be a little hard to parse sometimes. And you just have to know that clarity is something that you have to infuse. It's not something that usually comes super early on unless you're being very, very deliberate and very direct right out of the gate. And each artist will have their own approach. For me, I usually take up to 3 iterations for very clean lines and 4 iterations if it's something that I'm really trying to layer on levels of polish with, where I'm being very fastidious and very clean. But it's just not something that I default to just because I like a higher output rather than just singular, more illustrative pieces. And again, that's a personal decision, and we can talk more about that just a little bit later. But for now, I'm just going from the top down. Usually I go from head to trunk and then into the grounding elements like the legs, and then I usually work my way to hands and feet last. So what you're seeing here is just me flipping the canvas and figuring out the character based on the gesture. I didn't have a really clear idea in mind as I was going forward in terms of what type of character. I just knew I wanted more of a sci-fi vibe. with some obvious fantasy elements. So sort of, again, a hybrid. There's a lot of power to be gleaned from different areas of design and different genres of art. You've probably, if you're an artist, you've played a fair amount of fantasy games or a fair amount of sci-fi games. And if gaming isn't your thing, then perhaps you've watched series that cater to those genres. And it's just really helpful to have that mental library somewhat at the ready as you're going to be laying on these shapes for your character designs. So this is pretty much, it's pretty advanced as far as this course goes. We're going to be closer to this sort of stuff in lesson 7, just because it's really about laying clean groundwork prior to this. But I just wanted to show you so you don't get too discouraged with all the, more constructive, more gestural, more basic stuff, because that stuff leads to this stuff later, which is more fun stuff, arguably. I sometimes get comments on the YouTube channel, the beginner drawing course, just asking, like, is this supposed to not be fun? Is there something wrong with me? And the answer is no, there's nothing wrong with you. If you absolutely are dreading drawing, there's probably things that are irrelevant to drawing that are creating that feeling. We won't get into that here, but drawing should be at least a fairly neutral experience. It should just be an expression, the same way you feel about putting together sentences. You're not super excited, even as a public speaker, to just deliver everything with all that you have. After a while, it becomes somewhat rote or mundane, and so you have to find the love. You have to kind of rekindle that flame within, because that comes through in the work. If you're bored, there's a chance people are going to be bored looking at it. So I did have fun with this one. Basically, we just go in and use that figure as a basis to get more elaborate with our shape design, which we'll be talking about in the second lesson coming up here, where we talk more about construction, shape design, things of that nature. And then we're going to be maneuvering those shapes into place to create the ideas of, clothing, armor, weapons, just those sorts of artifacts. So yeah, this is basically it. I was going for a pretty sci-fi guy, as I stated, and the shield was sort of weird. I knew that if something hit the bottom of it, he wouldn't be able to hold it up just because of the way that the physics of it would work out. So I ended up making it more of a heater shield, more of a more medium size rather than a large shield or a long kind of awkward shield. But this is the demo of what we're going to be doing later in the course, so I want you to work really hard on these gesture assignments coming up. All right, congratulations. You have made it to the final module of lesson 1, and in this lesson we are going to be giving you your assignment. So I typically recommend at least a week, approximately 10 to 20 hours if you can swing it. Just creating and attacking these assignments, because that's ultimately what's going to give you that consistent amount of effort, like a compressed amount of effort over the series of like a course, for example. Putting in 10 to 20 hours each week, you're going to see some massive gains for the long term. If you're putting in only 5 hours or only 2 hours for every assignment, then obviously you're not going to see as much progress, you're not going to get as much out of it. So what I'm going to recommend for you to get a handle on gesture drawing, just to lay the foundation for some of what we're going to be doing later in this course, is to have 80 gestures from reference. Anywhere from 1 minute to 5 minutes is what I recommend. Of course, you're welcome to go shorter or longer based on whatever you want to do. Then we have 20 gestures from imagination. So if we do some quick math on the 80 gestures for 1 minute, that's obviously 80 minutes, which isn't that long. That's only an hour and 20 minutes. So if you have the 5-minute gestures, obviously that goes up to 400 minutes. And so you're going to have a much clearer time going from the gestural element and getting things down in a more cohesive way. Then 20 more from imagination. So again, the difference of being 20 minutes versus another 100 minutes, so up to 500 minutes. Which is at least a fair amount of time. And then to really get that extra bonus step, we're going to add a 25 construction also minimum to the gestures, so 1/4 of the gestures. And this is the part where you can spend the most time on it, where you can just go in and have just 1/4 of those drawings that you've completed out of the 100. 25 of those putting construction on top of them. So if you're looking for reference when it comes to gesture drawing, I highly recommend just going to Pinterest and typing in gesture drawing reference. Hopefully there's nothing too weird on the screen here. No, but anyway, all these are really epic. You can use any of them for gesture drawing. Like if I grab this dude, so yeah, you can just drop one of them into your favorite drawing program of choice or in your sketchbook, and then you can start to follow some of these lines, some of this action. You know, this is the upper arm, this is the torso curving in, this is where I would start the shoulders, this is where I would start the juxtaposition of the hips, this is where I would end the hips, and this is approximately where I would add the foot. So if we start, I could probably create the head first, extrapolate the arm out from there, and start to figure out the tilt and the axis of all of these various components in this gestural image by this very talented dancing man. You can see there's some cool foreshortening happening back here, so just kind of take and simplify that shape. Talk a little more about shape design in the construction phase of things, but for now, just, you know, do what you can. Obviously, you are going to construct 25 figures over this, so if you don't like your initial gesture when it comes to the construction phase, you can always just go ahead and create a much more solidified version. So that'll be really helpful. That's why I added that portion to the assignment. As far as getting the final gesture down, I'll probably flip the canvas a couple of times just to look. And go up into that arm there, the hand. And I really want you to notice the tilt of various extremities, various joints, just things of that nature. And we'll go back in with that leg. And you can draw on the forms all you want to kind of help you figure out the perspective and the foreshortening, bending the toes against the upper part of the gastrocnemius or calf there, going all the way down, creating that interesting foot shape. So flatten it out there because it's putting a lot of pressure on the ball of the foot. And as you can see, pretty rough rendition there, but the general motion, the general flow is there. And I can now take this and create a much more interesting piece of construction as far as the figure goes. I kind of lengthened the torso a little bit, so I'd probably drop that just a touch. But yeah, we're still well under our 5-minute mark. So it just means spend some extra time doing these and creating a sense of flow, a sense of weight, a sense of balance, and then going over it with obviously cleaner construction like we've done numerous times throughout this lesson. So I think you get the point. But either way, I want to thank you for making it this far. I want you to attack the lesson wholeheartedly. Just have fun with it. Don't be too hard on yourself. None of this is that serious. Just relax and get into some gesture drawing and feel the flow of the poses. Let your mind sort of meld with the process and feel out some of these angles, some of these elements. Use the line of action, and you should be in pretty good shape moving forward. So I will see you after about a week, hopefully. Don't just watch all of these and not do anything, because you won't get anything out of it. After about a week, I recommend, after your 100 gestures are done, your 25 construction drawings over those gestures, then you go to lesson 2, and we'll learn even more about construction and making things look even more solid, believable, foreshortening easy, that type of stuff. So thanks for watching. I'll see you after this assignment. Take care and happy drawing.